Loki Episode 5 introduced us to some of the strangest and most intriguing Loki variants we've seen to date. We got to meet Kid Loki, who was trapped in the void because he went against the sacred timeline by killing his brother Thor, succeeding where the main timeline Loki has failed so many times. We got to see President Loki, who spent his little screen time capturing the attention and adoration of the fanbase. And we got to meet Alligator Loki, who is, well, an alligator. But one of the standouts of the episode was Classic Loki, played by veteran actor Richard E. Grant. Classic Loki seems to be an older version of the Loki that we know and love, and director Kate Herron has confirmed that Classic Loki was born out of a thought experiment. What would have happened if Loki had survived Infinity War? Using this simple thought as a baseline, the story of Classic Loki was born. He recounts his encounter with the Mad Titan aboard the Statesman, and tells Loki that he cast an illusion so convincing that he was able to fool Thanos into believing that he had died. Afterwards, he simply floated away as an unassuming piece of debris, and lived out his days in isolation. When we meet him in the void, he seems to still be a very gifted illusion caster and magic user, albeit not immune to his age taking its toll. He is able to conjure realistic doubles of himself and others, open portals, and even recreate a seemingly scaled replica of the entirety of Asgard in the final moments of episode 5, in order to draw the attention of the Alliath. But one popular fan theory proposes that the reason he was able to create such an impressive illusion is rather tragic for the character. As we explored in our analysis of Sylvie's motivation, Asgardians live tremendously long lifespans, and spending a majority of their lives in solitude would subject them to such a drastic sense of isolation that you or I as humans cannot even begin to understand. Being alone, left to float adrift in the outer reaches of space, without any social interaction or personal connection, would most certainly take its toll on the mental health and well-being of even the strongest of individuals, and Asgardians are no exception. This theory proposes that during his time in isolation, Classic Loki got so good at recreating this image of Asgard because he spent most of his time creating pieces of it at a time. He allegedly spent his time recreating the images of his loved ones to have someone to talk to, recreating his homeworld in pieces in order to cope with the immense sense of loneliness he was facing. If this popular fan theory is true, he could act as a sort of puppet master for his illusions, feeding words into their mouths, and hearing whatever he wanted from anyone he knew, or being able to say whatever he wanted to any of these same people without fear of consequence. He could have allowed his loved ones to tell him stories of their great adventures. His vision of Thor could have told him how he battled and defeated Thanos, saving half of all the universe in the process, and rebuilding Asgard in all of its former glory without ever coming to know the truth. Classic Loki could have reunited with his mother by creating an illusion of her, and letting her say whatever it is he wanted to hear, reassuring him through the darkest of days as he was completely alone. He could have finally gotten his father's acceptance, or apologized to Sif for cutting her hair using these elaborate illusions, and throughout time, he would have gotten better by either repeating practice, or because he intended to make the illusions feel more and more real each time, with the hope of losing himself in the projections. Upon rewatching the scene in which he conjures Asgard back to life, it does seem to take considerable effort, ultimately tiring Classic Loki out, after the Alliath begins to lay the city under siege. Though this seems to negate the theory that he recreated the entirety of Asgard, there are a few explanations as to why this might be. The first is that this could simply be his first, or one of his first times, attempting to put the whole illusion together all at once after practicing it in pieces. He could have simply recreated small sections at a time, perhaps just a person, a building, a loved one, or something of the sort before working up and finally graduating to being able to conjure a complete recreation of his beloved home in his final moments. The second is that his age has taken its toll, and this is his first time recreating the entirety of Asgard in many, many years. Perhaps he is not as strong as he was in his prime, and is no longer able to maintain illusions this large without considerable effort. This means he could have very well lived out many of his days in solitude in a complete scaled replication of Asgard, but as he grew older, grew wearier and more tired, he had to let that fantasy go. Perhaps there is more to his joyous grin as he finally brings the illusion to life. It is the joy of not only sacrificing himself for something larger than his own self-interests, but finally being able to see his home again in its glorious entirety, even if only for a few brief moments. On the surface, this sounds like a therapeutic experience until you consider how he left things with his people that he had loved. Despite how many times he tells an illusion of his brother Thor that he's sorry, the real Thor will still never know. He will roam the galaxy as an Avenger and an Asgardian king, with both of them knowing that the last exchange they had with each other was when Thor tells Loki, "You really are the worst brother," and Loki promises that the sun will rise on them again. Though Loki can create as many illusions and fantasy scenarios as he wants, he will never be able to trick himself into believing them to be real, stuck to live with his empty promise to his brother until he is devoured by the Alioth. And Thor will live with his final encounter until the end of his days, wherever this may be. That is, until classic Loki decides to finally escape his isolation and seek out his long-lost brother and whatever may remain of his people, only to be captured and imprisoned by the TVA without being allowed the opportunity for proper closure. After all, if our Loki is anything to go on, we know that one of his greatest fears is ending up completely and utterly alone. But anyway, my friends, what do you think of this theory? Do you think that classic Loki used his powers to recreate illusions of his loved ones and the entirety of Asgard piece by piece? Do you think that this is how classic Loki lived out his isolation? Or do you believe that he was able to conjure all of Asgard on the fly? As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching the channel. Hit that subscribe button to assemble and join our team, and have a great day.